Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to Chess Comedy Books 24, in which we take a light-hearted look at the light-hearted world of chess. Before we go any further, I've got some notices to hand out to the school. I'd like to thank IMS Chess. I'm afraid I don't know what this stands for. IMZ Chess. They were kind enough to write to me. Mark Hannon. I'd like to thank Kevin Winter, Gary Kenworthy, Christopher Rodriguez. I'd also like to correct one of my many mistakes. When I was talking about the Isle of Lewis chessmen, I mentioned that they'd had a chess tournament some years back about actually in the island itself. And I said that Adgerstein, Nigel Short were two of the invitees, which they were. And I said that Jonathan Rowson had been invited. He hadn't. It was Paul Motwani. I do apologize to the gentleman concerned. They're not going to lose any sleep about it, but, you know, I'd like to get it as accurate as I can. Right. Today I want to talk about Canadian books, or books by that have come from Canada in some way, or authors who have collaborated. This isn't particularly important, maybe to you, but it's just a little thing I have in my collection, so I thought I'd highlight it. Gives me an opportunity to show you some books and have a little chinwag. First of these is pretty notorious. It's called Warriors of the Mind. This was one of the first books which Ray Keane put together a little consortium of guys, Harding Simpole. It's important to stress this is not Tim Harding, it isn't. It's the Honourable Julian Harding, I think. And he put his head together with Nathan Davinsky, who had been working on a related project way back when, 60 years ago, trying to work out, and good luck to them, who the greatest player of all time was, based around higher mathematics, of which Davinsky, I'm sure, knew an enormous amount. And Ray brought in his expertise, his spectator articles and so forth, and they put them together and they made a bit of a botch. I think, really, this is no crime. A number of people really disliked it heavily. It contains some photos and enormous amounts of statistics proving that Kasparov is the best player of all time and Alekhine is sort of nothing short of second division rubbish. Okay, I'm being sarcastic, but that it did come to some funny conclusions. There's Smyslov smiling, Spassky probably having a cigarette outside, Tal looking incredibly determined, Bobby looking incredibly determined, and Korchnoi looking supercilious. In case you're wondering who the greatest player of all time is, hard luck, you'll have to buy the book. Harding Simpole are the publishers, probably still around somewhere. It talks about Nathan Davinsky, who I had a little correspondence with, and he also appeared on Wogan and talked about chess and sex. That can't have taken long, can it? He was also an expert on contract bridge, and I think at one time, though not at his death, he was married to the Prime Minister of Canada. And how very nice that must have been. I expect you're the same yourself. A member of the Olympic team from 1954 to 1966. He wasn't as strong a player as Ray, but he had a mellifluous tone, and he was very fond of commentating. This is a signed copy, not dedicated to me. I bought this in Newbury, I think, some years back. So there we are. This is another book which is very unusual because you scarcely have heard of the player that they're celebrating, who is Frank Ross Anderson. And it is by John Donaldson, who's just written a book about a slightly more famous player, Bobby Fischer. But we'll leave that for the moment. I haven't even got that book, actually. In fact, to the publishers watching, I'd like to have it. Well, he talks about This is not a best games book. You get the good, the bad, and the ugly. Thanks very much. I have read through this book. It gives a bit of biography and his tournament record from 1946 through to 1972. The greatest year in chess that I can think of anyway. He seemed to have stopped playing, and he played a number of matches between just after the Second World War. I rather like it that it's about a lesser known player. He must have been about 2400, I would think. Here's some photos. They're a bit blurry, but they give you a picture, an inkling of what was going on. I bought it quite cheaply. It's from Fiala. It's Moravian Chess. If you know what that is, if you don't, Google it. And it gives me nearly 500 games by the great man. And you're trying to tell me over 500 games. One of the last ones is against Benko. And then there's one against Malik of East Germany, isn't it? And Garcia. And a telephone game played in 1973. I don't have his biographical details, but I'm sure you can get them. And his name is Frank Ross Anderson. It looks like he was a serious-minded person, and there he is, Canadian master. Here we have something that has some more up-to-date relevance for us, because Keith Richardson, British Chess News, has been celebrating his life. John Upham has organised two, and with many more to come, I hope, memorial tournaments. Keith died of Parkinson's some years back, 2 or 3 years, having been suffering, poor fellow. He was a correspondence grandmaster. He was also a strong over-the-board player. Played for Caversham. And Diamond Dust, which is what I'm looking at now, has got about, it lists about 10 authors. It's edited by Jonathan Berry. I've heard of Berry before. And it is a correspondence tournament, hence Keith's participation. And it also leans pretty heavily on biography, with photographs of all the players. There we are, and a bit of chat, and an annotated game from the tournament, which was won by Eric Bang. Well done, Eric. I've heard of Eric Bang because he's mentioned in Keen's book, Flank Openings. There we are. I hope that's come out. And there's the progressive table. Once again, not easy to get it in, is it? But nevertheless. Keith Richardson finished way down the table. He finished 9th equal. But that doesn't matter. What does matter is there's great games in it, annotations. They're pretty good on the modern defense in here, I think I remember. And also some Frenches, both of which interest me. Again, there's an example of one of the competitors. He gets a photograph, much more cheerful than the passport one anyway. A little bit of biography. And all the players were approached to write notes to the games, which some duly did. I expect some of them said they would and didn't. Oh, God, do I know that feeling. But the fact remains, it's a pretty good book. I bought it for £2.50 from Chess and Bridge. If you go there and have it, you can't go there at the moment. But nevertheless, if you go there and rummage around, you sometimes find on the second-hand shelves some good bargains. That is an example of that. We continue, of course, with Canada. This is Nick's Best. This gentleman. This is a book by Lawrence Day, whom I had the pleasure of interviewing for BCM about 7 or 8 years ago. He's written a book about his colleague, Nikolov, Brian Nikolov. And I do accept that that is not a well-known player any more than Frank Anderson was, who I mentioned just now. But nevertheless, an enormous amount of games here. An enormous amount. And they are annotated in pretty loving style. Quite pleasant, slightly old-fashioned fonts. Bold strike for the moves. Some diagrams, of course. And proper introduction to the games, which are in algebraic notation. They don't use figurines. They're talking about playing 2 bishop g5 against the Dutch, which I rather like. Bogliabov's move. They used Rabar index, which some people, particularly if you're putting it into a database, might prefer. I prefer it, to be honest. I like to see it. And here he is playing in the 1994 zonal. I have a feeling that he and the cross table, it's a bit unwieldy, isn't it, to go in the... Canada by then was building up in strength. I mean, Kevin Spraggett lives in Portugal now, I think, but Duncan Suttles was already by then, and sadly so, retired. But Nick sadly lost his fight with depression. I'm not putting this in out of sympathy. I'm putting it in because it's a good book, and because I wanted to celebrate Canadian chess. I've never travelled to Canada. I'd like to. I've got relations out there, and if they're listening, no, they're not listening. Anyway, there we are. I'll give you one more thing about it. I'll just try and find out. What openings he likes the best, because you can sometimes glean. It hasn't got an openings index. Never mind. The author is an IM, Lawrence Day, as I say. And so was the subject, Brian Nikolov. I didn't know that. He was an IM. So there we are. And there he is, looking thoughtful. This is an altogether more famous book. There is a second book of Yanovsky's games, which I've seen when I went to the chess library, the National Chess Library. It was probably donated by Harry Golombek. Well, this is an earlier effort by Pittman. You've heard me mention Pittman so often before, if you've listened to any of them. If you haven't listened to any of them, you damn well should have done. Yanovsky came over to England to go to university, I dare say on some scholarship. And whilst he was here, he won the British Championships. This is a book of his games. It's pretty rare. I've seen it selling for a lot of money. British chess champion 1953, it says. And when you consider that when he went to university, he'd already beaten Botvinnik at Groningen 1946. It will show you, he was at Oxford with Barton. It will show you just how experienced he was, but also that he was able to be sufficiently disciplined. He played a bit of chess when he was with us, and that's lovely. He didn't get so obsessed that he didn't, he wasn't making sense of his studies. This is particularly, it's in descriptive notation. This is a particularly nice book if you like the French defense, as I do. It's got a lot about the classical, with bishop g5, bishop e7, e5. He was forever defending these things and doing very well. He was the youngest player to play in an Olympiad right up until 1968. And he played at Buenos Aires, 1939. The tournament that almost didn't take place, the Olympiad, the team event, which almost didn't occur because the Germans, well, the Nazis, say Germans, were about to start the Second World War. And they didn't even tell us. I mean, how underhand can you get? But anyway, he was there as a boy playing for Canada, and he held the record for the youngest participant right up until 1970, when a gentleman who I met, Leslie Liao of Singapore, took over his record. And I met Leslie when I was a child, who was staying in the same guest house as me. There we are. This is called Chess the Hard Way. There is a second, I repeat, volume of Yanovsky's games, which I don't have. I can't show you, but you could find out what it was. Yanovsky never came back. He actually was eligible to play in the British Championships, but for most of his life. But I think he only played once when he won. I mean, in a way, what's nicer than that? I'm just looking through to see. He played in several interzonals, but he never really challenged as a candidate. But I think originally he was Polish. He had Polish blood in him. I think it's that. I don't think he was pure Canadian. I know that the Penrose family were over in Canada, and for moral reasons, political thoughts, they came back to England knowing the rise of fascism. And Yanovsky, who was in Canada, came back after the war, having been at university and done his studies. So it's interesting that the two great men crossed paths almost, except not. Now, I've left the best till last. This is a trilogy. It's a trilogy with a difference. This has 100 selected games by the Canadian Grandmaster Duncan Suttles, and I hope you're smiling already. Suttles, like Yanovsky, was a Grandmaster, and Suttles, I think, must have suffered. This is a collaborative effort. Bruce Harper, Yasser Sirouan, and a contribution by my old friend Gerard Welling, which is one of the reasons that I knew about the book in the first place. This has an introduction by Lawrence Day, who was heavily influenced, and I would like to think Suttles was influenced, and Yanovsky by Lawrence Day. And here's the third volume. I think they put together enough money to make it into a trilogy. Each of the books, it's not chronological, is done by opening classification. And the chess on the edge refers to him playing knight h6 in the modern defense, which over in Canada they call the rat. Yes, look, as black, Suttles was an unwavering proponent of 1g6. The devotees of this opening will find many rat and pert defenses, including games against some of the world's top players. Yes, well, Suttles became a grandmaster in, I think, 1973, and he continued to play in the interzonals, several of them, and for the Canadian Olympiad team every 2 years or so. He's still alive, but he is very retired player. We miss him, but he hasn't played for a long time. If you look at the format, I rather like it. Look, plenty of space, but it's several American books are like this. Well, here's a Canadian one that's like this. Now, I hope you will subscribe, like, down the bottom here, click the buttons. I'll put in a list, not necessarily immediately, of the books I'm recommending. This has been Chess Comedy Books. I'm James Pratt, and I'm not Canadian. Goodbye.